guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 7 of our roll top desk build. Well, on last week's show, we finished up by putting all of the faceplates on all of the drawers, all the hardware. We got the supports for the writing boards and got them all squared away. The next step, technically, in the build is to make the top for this desk. But truth be told, I don't have enough stock in the shop right now, so I'm going to defer from that for the moment, and I'm going to move forward with starting on the material that I need for the top section, sides, and the back panels. Well, when I'm looking at the bill of materials and the cutting list for the upper desk sides, I'm seeing a lot of cut to fit. And by a lot, I mean this panel here, and then this one here says cut to contour as far as the length goes. That doesn't really help me in this case. So hopefully I'm going to be able to work through that and give you guys some dimensions here. The other thing I'm seeing that's missing is the panel thickness. They're saying that everything else is a 1-inch thick panel, or sorry, a 1-inch thick stock, but they're not giving a dimension on the panel. And that there, I'm thinking would be 3/4 of an inch. The thing is that on the base of the desk, in the lower desk, it showed all of the panels as being 3/4 of an inch thick, which was the same thickness of material as the sides. Now, because of the raised panel joinery, etc., that caused the very outmost surface of each panel to protrude from the desk rail and stiles. And I was actually okay with that. I kind of like that look. But with this top panel, we want them to be flush. So we're going to knock the panel thickness back to 3/4 of an inch for this, so that it's not sticking out any further. As well, if you wanted your panels on the lower desk to not stick out, you could have reduced them to, say, 5/8 instead of 3/4 for their thickness. But I guess our first thing that we need to do here is look at our print and decide the dimensions that we need to do for this cut to contour piece. And once we get those dimensions and we can scribble it in here, I'm going to mill a bunch of 1-inch thick stock. So I have a bunch of the 1-inch thick stock milled out, and I've jointed one edge, and I've marked it with X's along that edge so that I know exactly which is my flat surface. I need to rip this now to the proper thicknesses, or the widths rather, but before I do, let's have a look at that cut list. Uh-oh. Kenny's got his pad of paper out. This can't be good. Bottom line is, let's have a look at these cut lists here. We have our upper rear stile. Now that would be this piece here at the back, and they're claiming that it's 2 7/8 by 18 inches, and I'm cool with that. Sure, I'll take your word for it. Now we have down here, part D, the lower rail. Well, we know that the rails run in between the stiles, just like this. Stiles are the upright pieces, rails run horizontally. So here we have the lower rail, and we are talking 2 7/8. Okay, I can dig that, by 23.5. You know what, I can dig that too. And we've got this front stile here, and they want you to cut to contour. Well, that's because this piece actually does one of these things here, like this. So this will be your front stile. And they're saying that this is a total of 2 7/8 wide, but cut to contour. Well, it doesn't really help me, but I've kind of fooled around with the plan, and I'm pretty sure I need a piece that's 7 1/4 inches wide, and it'll be about 30 inches long. That will incorporate this sort of a thing, that I can get this whole one stile from one board. and then trim it up afterwards. Okay, so we have upper rear style, part A. We have part C, which is our part B, which is our front style. We have part D, which is our lower rail. What the heck is part C, the upper style? I'm going to go under the assumption that it's this. And as we know, if it runs horizontally like that, that is not a rail. Or sorry, that is not a style. That is a rail. So I'm going to go under the assumption here that part C, as I've labeled it here, the upper style, is actually meant to say the upper rail. And I don't mean to be nitpicky, but if you purchase a set of plans as I have done here, things like this should have been picked up long before they ever fell into my hands. So bottom line here, I think when this video is all said and done, I may do a little sit-down video with these plans and run through all the discrepancies that I found, so that those of you who are trying to go through and build this thing can maybe have a heads up long before you ever get to the problems that I'm getting to. So now that I'm done cranking about those dimensions and inconsistencies in the plans, I'm going to put a ripping blade in the table saw, and I will rip all those parts to their required dimension, in this case of 2 7/8 of an inch. I've got the stock cut for the back style and the lower rail. I didn't cut any stock for this upper rail because I'm hoping to get it from the piece that I'm using here for this front style. So the next thing that we need to do before we can cut these to length, or before we can get our stock for this upper rail, is to make a template for our front rail style. Now I'm getting confused. Front style. To make our template, I've just got a piece of 1/4 inch MDF. I've used some graphite paper here. I've laid it diagonally across our piece. And I'm going to take our blueprint, which has a pattern for this front profile of our front style. I've got it folded right at the base here where it should be, and I'm just going to make sure that it's lined up. I'm going to clamp this end down, and then I'm just going to trace carefully this profile. Now I'm using pencil here to trace this in case I want to erase it off of my print afterwards. There we go. And if I unclamp this now, underneath our graphite paper, I should have a nice representation here of our profile. Now I'll get French curves and I'll clean this up to give it a nice solid line, because of course you don't get a perfect line when you're tracing like that by hand. And once I get that the way that I like it, I'm going to cut this out and sand it up to the line, and then we're going to repeat this pattern on the other side of it to get our 2 7/8 of an inch thickness on this. Now that you have your template rough cut, take it over to the disc sander or the oscillating sander for the inside curves and sand it up nice and neat to the line that you've made here for your profile. Once you get your template made, just hold it firmly down onto your piece of stock, line it up so you can get the best usage out of the piece of stock that you have here, and draw your profile. Now I've left it a little long at this end up here, and that was intentional because we can trim that later. But we're going to want to make sure that we mark this line here. That's an important line to mark. And just mark the profile of your piece out onto your stock. Just like that. Once you get that first pass marked, you need to shift everything over the 2 7/8 so that you have a uniform thickness of 2 7/8 of an inch all the way along here. It's a little finicky, but that's what you need to do. Well, the easiest way I found to do this, and I'm just testing it on the template, would be to get a steel rule or something like that with a hole in it that you can use to register a pencil. And then with a small scrap of wood as a shoulder sort of thing on there, you can just run it along the edge of your template, and you can very easily mark that 2 7/8 inch radius all the way around without too much trouble. That worked really well. So I'm going to cut the outside line here, sand it up to that line, and then we're going to do this method of duplicating it, and then of course we're going to cut it out and we'll have our pieces for our outer or our front styles. I have the one profile cut and sanded up to the line here in our oak, and I just want to show you how effective this method here is. It's primitive, yes, but effective, definitely. So you just line up the edge here like that, and what you want to do is keep an eye on the fact that your guide board is flat against your stock. And just carefully follow it along with your pencil in the hole. And if you follow it all the way to the end, you will end up with your second line here at 2 7/8. So just go along with a tape measure and verify that everything is at 2 7/8 all the way along. And when you're happy with that at 2 7/8, cut your second profile and sand to the line. Now I'm only going to cut one of these and get it the way I want it, and then I'm going to rough cut the other one, and I'm going to use a flush trim router bit to take the other one down to its final size. Well, I got lucky on those top pieces for the upper rails, and I was able to cut them out of the inside scrap pieces that I got when I cut those front stiles. So win-win, no waste or less waste, and I got those pieces and didn't have to mill them from other stock. So now it's time to cut them to their final length as far as anything that's a straight piece, being your top rail, your bottom rail, and your rear stile. That curved front stile, I'm actually going to leave that longer, and then as I fit it into place, I can trim it up later. I just think it's a smarter way to go here. Well, I don't think you need a video. You've seen the rail and stile and raised panel video. It's the exact same thing. If you don't remember, go back and watch that video to refresh your memory, but we are going to carry forward and do all of the rail and stile joinery on these pieces for the side panels of the upper desk. Once I get that done, I'll come back and see ya, and I'll show you where we're at. Well, once you've got the side panels done of your upper desk, and I don't mean the raised panel part, I mean the rail and stile joinery, then you need to move on and mill the stock for the actual raised panels. Now for that, it's going to be 3/4 of an inch thick, and your size will be governed by the interior dimensions of that space once you get those side panel rail and stile joinery done. I just want to show you the panel here. Truth be told, I made it twice, because the first time I made it, I actually didn't like the joinery. It wasn't tight enough for me. It didn't look right to me, and I just wasn't happy with it. And I know what's going to happen over the years. That's all I'm going to see. I'm going to look at that desk and think, holy crap, I wish I would have redone that. For the sake of the little bit of lumber that you end up wasting, I think it's better, if you're not happy with the joinery that you've got, just to cut your losses, scrap it. And while it's a shame to waste that 1-inch thick lumber, I was able to reuse some of the parts, as in the back stile and the lower rail I could use to cut the new top rails. But in my mind, it was well worth it to cut my losses, scrap what I had, and end up with a product that I was happy with. So here is the picture of the ones that I scrapped. Okay, not bad. And while you guys might think, holy crap, that looks all right. Yeah, it does. But to me, I wasn't happy. And this would be the product that I ended up with, being the new ones. No big deal. Time to mill some 3/4 stock. And then we're going to get into laminating the piece that will go into that center void, or the center hole for the raised panel. While we're at the jointer, we need to mill a bunch of 1-inch thick stock, and that will be for the surface or the tabletop of our lower desk. I finished milling the 3/4 inch stock we need for the panels of these side panels of the upper desk. And what I've done is jointed one edge on each panel and then run it through the table saw to get a parallel straight edge on both. I've also checked the fit on this, and it's a seamless joint, and that's what you want. You want a nice clean joint that you don't have any gaps in. Now, if you're not sure, you can clamp it right in the middle, and that will definitely tell you if you have any gaps on either side. And if you do, run it through the jointer and then through the table saw again to get a parallel edge. Now, I used the leftover stock from the 1-inch thick stuff that I milled for our side panels. So, of course, I don't always get a perfect board because of the way that the wood is sized, sort of thing. When you use the jointer, you lose some stock, etc. So I have some rough areas here. And for that reason, I've placed this board here, and I have my one side panel. This will be my right-hand side panel. On the width of our pieces, remember, we're going to be using panel barrels in here. So we need 3/16 of an inch stock extra to go into these 1/4 inch wide grooves that are here from our rail and stile bit. So I'm going to draw a line at 3/16 of an inch up from the bottom of our piece. And this is just a guideline. This is not carved in stone. And if you're not using panel barrels, obviously this may not apply to you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the bottom edge of our lower rail, the top edge of our lower rail with that line. And I'm going to slide it over until I can see that I've gotten rid of the majority of the imperfections. I've got a little bit here in the corner. I'm not worried about it because when we route that raised panel, that's going to take that out of there. But I've got some checking here on this top board. So for that reason, I'm going to slide this out until I can get rid of that checking. And now that I have that in place, I can see the whole board. This is the exposed face. I know that I have enough material down here to fit in, and I'm just going to trace inside our opening here. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to be laminating this together with biscuits. And you guys have seen me mess it up before, where I did the cutting and there was an exposed biscuit. Well, I'd hate to have an exposed biscuit on a routed raised panel, I tell you that. So I've got that mark there. I know how my panels need to align now in order to get it properly in place without any imperfections showing. And I'm now going to use my biscuit joiner, and I'm just going to place a couple biscuits here in the center to help me glue this together. And once I get it glued together, clamp it, set it off to the side and let it dry. We're not going to waste any time cutting this right now. We'll let it dry up overnight first. As well, if you remember, we had in our top rails of our lower desk, we had a saw kerf in that top rail on the inside edge for those clips that are going to hold the tabletop. Well, those same clips are going to be used to hold the top of our upper desk. So it's a good idea while you're thinking of it to cut those kerfs at this point in time. On the inner edge, it'll be 3/8 of an inch down, and I believe it's 3/8 of an inch deep. You want to cut the kerf just in that top rail. Don't extend it out to the stiles, just through the rail, and then you don't have to worry about forgetting that. So mark out your panels, make sure everything's the way you like it and that you're happy with the look. And once you're done that, then we can get to gluing these together and moving on to milling the stock for the lower desktop. For those of you who are wondering exactly how big the panel is for this milling, it actually works out to be 29 3/4 wide, I believe it is, by 51.5 long. So that's a lot of milling. It's 1 inch thick, so we don't need a video of the milling of that, but I'm going to come back and see you once we get to the edge jointing of these boards and laminating them together for the tabletop or the desktop of the lower desk. I've got all the pieces milled up for the top, and now it's time to laminate them together. Now, there are some people that say that it really doesn't make a difference if you alternate the grains or the cupping of the grains. I prefer to do it where this side here will be an upward arc, this side lower arc, upward arc, lower arc. It's up to you. If you don't want to do that, don't do it by any means. But either way, I'm going to clamp this all together, clamp it down, check everything to make sure it's the way I want it, and then I'm going to mark for the biscuits. And I'm using biscuits to help with the alignment here more so than strength. But I'm going to mark for the biscuits, cut those biscuits, and then I'm going to glue and clamp this together overnight. And, well, at that point, we'll deal with it then. Well, here we are. It's the next day, and it's time to unclamp our desktop here. Something I'd like to point out when you're applying your clamps is that if you're using bar clamps, you really want to be alternating your clamps from the top of the desk, and you can see the one at this level here I have below the surface, and then this one's on top, the next one below, the next one on top. The reason for that is if you put them all on top and you apply the pressure to the clamps, it wants to pull the edges up, so it's going to cup kind of this way. If you put them all on the bottom, it's going to be the opposite effect. It's going to actually arch it. So you want to be placing your clamps top, bottom, top, or bottom, top. It doesn't really matter as long as you're alternating them to equal the pressure. You also want to try to keep them in equal increments across your surface, especially for a glue up that's this large. If you are not in a rush sort of thing and you want to make it a little more foolproof, do it in sections. Just glue up 2 pieces, let them dry up, then do the next section and the next section, and so on and so on. I was in a position that I was able to do them all at once, and it worked out for me. The next step that we're going to do now that we are going to unclamp this entire assembly is I'm going to take a belt sander to it, and I'm going to sand this flat. There is a little tiny ridge right here between these 2 boards. I'm going to sand that all out. I've wiped off all the squeeze out from the top of the desk, but the bottom of the desk I was unable to get to. It was just too heavy for me to maneuver. So I'm going to take the squeeze out off the bottom. I'm going to sand both surfaces, and then we're going to trim it up to its length. The width is already the correct width because I calculated that in my width of my panels that I glued up. So we're at 29 3/4 across here, and now we are going to, once we get it sanded, we're going to cut our ends to make it the proper length. Well, in order to cut the ends, this is a pretty big panel to be running through your table saw. So what I've done is I've used a framing square to draw a line where I want to cut it. I want to get rid of this imperfection right here. Not a big deal. I've got a straight edge tool guide here clamped down in place, and I'm just going to run my circular saw across here to cut this line. If I'm not happy with the finish that I get on the edge of that, and I don't think I can sand it to a clean finish, what I'll do is I'll use a flush trim bit in my router, and I'll just back up the edges here to avoid tear out, and I'll use the same process, except I'll just take like a 1/16 of an inch or less skim off of this edge just to clean it up with that flush trim if I'm not happy with the finish that the skill saw gives me. So I've checked the edge. It's straight all the way across. It's square. I like the cut. It's not as fine and refined as I would like it to be, but that's what sanding's all about. There is a tiny little bit of burning, but not as much as I expected. So it actually turned out okay. Once I get the roundover routed on this, I think some minor sanding is going to really clean that up and we'll be done with it. So I'm going to do this exact same process on the other side. I believe it works out to be 151.5 inches will be the length of this desktop. And once I'm done that, of course, we'll head to the roundover part of this. Something I want to point out, guys, is I'm using the desk itself as the work surface here. Just please make sure that you have enough clearance over the edge that you're not cutting into your desk with the with the circular saw. That would be absolutely disastrous at this point in time, and I think I would cry on camera if that ever happened here. So I'll cut the other side and I'll come back and see you. All right, it's cut, and I think I screwed up a little earlier. I think I said 151.5 inches. No. This isn't a banquet table for 50. It's a desk. 51.5. Lose that other 100, will you? That's a lot of lumber. I'm going to take a 3/8 round over now, and I'm going to go around the entire surface of the desk on the top and the bottom. You can put whatever profile you like on it. I really don't want a fancy profile on the desktop though. I don't want to deter from the looks of the desk. So I'm thinking 3/8 will be good. I'm going to run it on a test piece first just to make sure that I like the shape of the round over, make sure that it's not too sharp because I want some girth to that edge. And we're going to round over the entire thing, and then I'll come back and see you. And there we have the routed desktop sat in place. Now this is not attached at this point in time, as I really don't want to attach it just yet. I want to give it a bit of time to settle down before I lock it in place with those clips. Now if you wanted to, I mean, you could stop right here, add the baseboards around the bottom, and you could be done. This is a beautiful desk in its own right. But we're not about that. We're about going that one step further and getting into the roll top. So there you go, guys. It's looking great. If you've got something that looks like this at this point in time and you've made it this far in the build, be proud of yourself. You should be. It's quite the accomplishment. And hey, good for you. This is awesome. And with that, we've run out of time for another week. But good gosh, this desk is looking fantastic. That solid oak top just caps it right off and makes it look just that much more beautiful. So something I just want to point out, when you're doing a build like this, you really don't want to cut corners. I'm just going to pan away from me at the moment and show you this ugly contraption. And what this is a custom base plate that I had to make, or a temporary base plate that I had to make for my router when I wanted to do that roundover, because the bit was just ever so slightly too big for the actual entrance hole that's in my existing router base. So instead of saying, hey, that's okay, we'll try it without the base plate and not having the support, in which case you're risking gouging your edges, I took the extra half an hour to get a 1/4 inch thick piece of MDF and make that temporary base plate to make sure that it was done properly. Guys, we're flying along in this build. I hope you're enjoying it. I know that there's not as much information in this build as what there normally is as far as the demonstrating of the processes, but that's where the videos earlier came in with the rail and style joinery, etc., for reference, so that this build could be reduced in its length of time just a little bit. So guys, thanks for tuning in this week. I hope you're going to join me next week when I see you for yet another woodworking video.